Hi there, so let's get started with this session today, quick start PubSub API. So we're going to have a quick start information on the PubSub API, bit of a walkthrough of how to utilize it using a Node.js application. I'm your host for this session. My name is Jonathan Fox. I'm a Golden Hoodie recipient, 22 times certified system and application architect, and I'm a technical architect at a .org partner in the UK called Sirico. Thank you. Now, this session was originally hosted on the Dreamforce 2022 Developer Theatre stage. This is a repeat of that session for those of you who couldn't make it in person at Dreamforce. So this is a thank you to all those who did attend the session and made it to Dreamforce, but also those who are interested in the session and want to view it today. So hence the recording and submitting it online for you all. Generally though, thank you for being a part of the Trailblazer ecosystem. Salesforce ecosystem wouldn't be what it is without Trailblazers. So the agenda for the session is going to be a quicker session probably than 20 minutes, which it was at Dreamforce, because I'm able to speed through it a little bit quicker, and you can go back and re-listen to this because it's recorded. So agenda, what is the PubSub API? How is it different? Because I'm going to compare it to the streaming API. So how is it different to the streaming API? Some compare and contrasts. I'll look at the code in Node.js. Also setting up Salesforce.org really quickly to be able to use the PubSub API. It's the same way as we set it up for the streaming API as well. So creating a change data capture event or a platform event. And then we'll have a look at a demo, see how it really quickly works. So what is the PubSub API? We've spoke about it a few times already. What is it? Here's the definition of the PubSub API. This is a quote. You can get the actual definition of it from developer.salesforce.com. Now, I'm not going to read it out loud because you can see it on the screen, you can pause it, you can read it, you can go to developer.salesforce.com and go and have a look at it yourself. However, what I have done is I've highlighted some key words. So the PubSub API is a single interface that is built on top of gRPC. It uses HTTP2 as its transfer protocol, and it delivers binary event messages in the Apache Avro format. They're the key words. Let's have a look at how that breaks down. So gRPC was developed by Google for their client server application framework. Really good use cases are microservice architecture. PubSub is built on top of gRPC. Now gRPC has a bunch of cool features such as bidirectional messaging, message streaming, subscription flow support. They're the two main ones that we'll look at today anyway. It's not built in a way that we can use Comet D, hence why we use gRPC and we use the PubSub API. And Comet D is no longer going to be actively developed, and there's going to be no future releases on the streaming API that are going to give us any functionality. So we want to be looking at gRPC, we want to be looking at PubSub API. gRPC is supported in 11 different languages: Java, JavaScript, Python, C++. So they're some of the kind of features and functionality around gRPC, and we'll go into a couple of those in a little bit more detail later on. Single interface. What's meant by a single interface? Well, it means that we have a faster time to value when developing, because we are using the single API interface to manage all aspects of the PubSub API and what you would naturally get with the streaming API and a combination of others. What does that matter though? Whether we use 5-6 different APIs compared to the one single interface? Well, as a business, it matters, because although you may not care how many interfaces your developers use, the longer it takes for them to develop, the harder it is for them to maintain, the harder it is for them to test and deploy. All adds time, all costs money. So the single interface is a real sweet spot for the PubSub API because it means it's quicker, more transparent, and easier to manage. The Apache Avro format, well, this is the way that the messages are encoded, and is how we have to decode them using the Apache Alpha schema. It means that these binary messages are smaller in size, and it adds to the speed of the whole gRPC protocol itself, meaning that we get 7 to 11 times faster message transfers than we do in comparative situations when looking at REST APIs. So the PubSub API supports 3 different types of events within Salesforce: high volume platform events, change data capture events, and real-time event monitoring. Some examples of how we might use those in an application are change data capture. When an order is updated, you may want to use the PubSub API so that your warehouse system, your warehouse app can subscribe to the change data capture events and then provide the information to the pickers in the warehouse to pick the items ready for the dispatch of the order. You might use real-time event monitoring to subscribe to find out when a particular user in a particular set of circumstances logs into the org, and then perhaps republish back to the org a platform event which is subscribed to or watched by an Apex trigger or a flow, a triggered flow, to give someone a particular permission set, grant them or restrict their permissions, for example. There's some examples that you can start thinking of how we use these, but actually, how is that different from the streaming API? Because, well, I mean, you can do that subscription with the streaming API, and you can publish back into Salesforce using REST API. So those 2 situations I just gave, you can do without the PubSub API. So how is it different? Why would we use the PubSub API? Well, on the left-hand side there is what you can see are the benefits or features of the PubSub API. And on the right-hand side, what I've given is a bit of a comparison of what you would do if you were using the streaming. Well, I've put streaming API at the top of the header on the right-hand side. If you weren't using the PubSub API for those things on the left, how would you do it on the right is basically what I'm trying to illustrate. So, for example, subscription flow control. Within the PubSub API, we can define how many events we want to receive. We can set it 100, and once we receive 100 events, the connection closes. We don't have subscription flow control within the streaming API. It will just stream. That gives us less control over our application, less control over how many events we receive, and we can be overloaded with events. Publish status. Now, the publish status is a really cool feature of the PubSub API because when you publish an event back to Salesforce, so platform event, for example, you get an actual publish status, not just a HTTP response that you would get if you were publishing back to Salesforce without using the PubSub API. So on the right-hand side, it would actually, you can't use the streaming API to publish back. You would use a REST API, but you would just get a HTTP response. You get a full publish status and more information with the PubSub API, so you have more control and you can rest easier knowing that your business logic is going to be taken care of because you know that the event has, in fact, been received within Salesforce. The PubSub API shares messages in a binary format rather than a JSON. It's just something that you need to be aware of when you're handling those messages, when you're publishing and subscribing. But the binary format allows it to be smaller and a bit faster. And then the last 3, 4, 5, and 6, you can see on the left-hand side, it looks like I've just copied and pasted PubSub API for all of them. Well, that's this single interface. You can publish events, subscribe to events, and get the schema for that particular event, all by using the PubSub API. That faster, easier development using that single interface that I mentioned earlier. If you were to try and do this without using the PubSub API, let's have a look at that streaming API column. Well, you can't publish events using the streaming API, so you'd have to use a data API. SOAP, bulk, REST. If you want to subscribe to events, obviously you'd use the streaming API. And then you want to get the schema for those, you're looking at REST, perhaps tooling or metadata, but you can't do it through that single interface. So to publish, subscribe, and get the schema for events without using the PubSub API, you're looking at least 2 different APIs types, streaming and REST, with different endpoints completely for each. Whereas on the left-hand side, PubSub API, you're using the same endpoint and you're using the same API altogether. You're using that same interface, single interface throughout it all. So setting up your Salesforce org, how do we start streaming events from Salesforce so that we can subscribe to them within our custom application? Really simply, head over to Salesforce, go to Setup, integrations, and then for this example, I'm going to be looking at that order management scenario. The back warehouse, they're going to pick the orders for us, ready for dispatch. So I'm going to set up a change data capture event whenever an order is updated or created, deleted or undeleted. My custom application is going to get notified through an change data capture event. If you wanted to create a different scenario and you were using platform events, set up integrations, but rather than change data capture, you click on platform events and you create your platform event. Much like you create a custom object, you define the schema, whereas change data capture, you don't define the schema. It streams the whole objects fields. Bear in mind, obviously, if you haven't created platform events before, change data capture events, whenever created, updated, deleted, or undeleted happens on a particular record, it publishes the event to the stream for you. Platform events does not. Just because you've created a platform event schema doesn't mean it's going to start publishing these events. You need a way of actually publishing them yourself within Salesforce. So you're looking at things like Apex, or you're looking at flows to publish those events for the platform events to enable your custom application to subscribe and receive that event itself. So let's have a look at the code in Node.js and see what we would be looking at when we're writing an application outside the Salesforce platform to subscribe or to publish to this event framework using the PubSub API. So first of all, I'm using Node.js because you've probably seen plenty of Java when using Comet D, and Python's everywhere because everyone's loving Python at the moment. So I wanted to go back to a really nice familiar language such as JavaScript, and we're using Node.js. So first of all, you need to connect to Salesforce. You need to be authenticated. So I'm firing an OAuth flow using JSForce, which is a JavaScript OAuth library to connect to Salesforce. It's an open sourced library. You can use any library you want to use to trigger your OAuth flows, or you can create your own if you really want. This is just a really nice, easy one that I've used before, so I've used it again. You can see I'm using Salesforce username, password, and security token. I wouldn't expect anyone watching this to do that. What I would actually expect is you to use a connected app, a certificate, and a JSON web token at the very least to make your app secure. But for this demo, I kept it very plain, simple, and fast by using username, password, and token. Next, you want to initiate the connection with the PubSub API. Now, I'm not going to go through every line here, but what I will call out are a couple of different things. A couple of lines down, you'll see protoloaded.loadSync, and that's loading the proto definition file for the PubSub API. Now, that's provided to us by developer.salesforce.com. You can see the link down at the bottom of this slide. You don't have to worry about it. I use an environment variable to define the file path. You could use whatever you want, but you get to download this file already made for us via the developer.salesforce.com website. There's a link there to a GitHub repo where you can download the file. You don't need to worry anymore about that. And then down towards the bottom, you will see I'm using sfdc package.pubsub and supplying the PubSub endpoint again in an environment variable, but I am defining the PubSub endpoint. It's a generic endpoint, not specific to your Salesforce org. Much like your REST APIs, you use your my domain, and it's very specific to your org. This is a generic one because the event bus is not on the core platform anymore. It's a off-platform event bus, which makes it easier to connect to cross clouds, meaning Marketing Cloud, Commerce Cloud, etc. can use this event bus much easier than it could with the streaming API. Therefore, the PubSub endpoint is also supplied to us at developer.salesforce.com. Remember, you need to include the port number as well at the end of that. But again, supplied to us in the documentation, so no need to worry too much. Just two things I wanted to call out to you. Next, we get in the schema. So we've connected to the Salesforce org. We've authenticated ourselves through OAuth. We've initiated the connection to the PubSub API, and now we need to get the schema for the event we want to use. This is where the PubSub API gets really quite interesting and useful. You can get more than one event schema here in a single API call, in the single interface. Why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to get a change data capture schema for the order object, and you might want to get a platform event schema because you might want to publish a platform event in the same instance. That's where you can get multiple schemas based on your business logic. Remember, down a couple of lines from the bottom there, you'll see avro.parse, and that's because remember when I mentioned the binary messages are encoded in the Apache Avro format. We need to use the Avro.js library to parse the schema so that we can actually use it. And then finally, we're going to actually subscribe to the event. That's what we're here to do, is subscribe to the event. Now, within the subscription.write, we can do multiple of these because we're creating an event stream here. So we can subscribe to multiple platform events, multiple change data capture events, or real-time event monitoring. It doesn't have to be just the one. And when we've got our subscription flow control, we define how many events we want to receive. We can see we've put in that as we're passing that as a variable, but what you can see it up at the top there, subscription request number requested. But that's where we can start implementing this business logic. When we've hit that number of requested events, we could open a new connection. We could perhaps publish to a particular API, or we have the last event ID, and perhaps we just open that same connection back up again, starting at the last received event. That's where our business logic can start taking hold, but we have the flexibility because we can define the number requested and we can subscribe to multiple different events now with the subscription.write method. And we have the subscription events. So again, this is where your business logic can really take hold, and depending on the different events and error status there for my examples, you can start making your app do wild and wonderful things depending on what your requirements actually are. So let's have a quick look at how this would work in real time. So my back office, my warehouse, have their application running. So we can see that they have their application running, and they have connected to the Salesforce org, OAuth. They have initiated the connection, and they have got the schema for the order change event. Now we are subscribed to the order change event. Fantastic. In that very same interface, in that single interface, in the same instant, we've also got a different schema. So I mentioned two different schemas, and we've actually published a platform event. And here's the publish acknowledgement that I mentioned, which is more than just a HTTP response. Now you can see it's encoded. I should have really decoded it, but you get more information than you do just than a HTTP response. But the beauty of the PubSub API is really this section here, which I wanted to just reiterate one more time. I've received two different schemas from two different events, two different types of events. One's a data event, is a change data capture event, and a platform event. Two schemas loaded in one single interface at the same instant. I subscribed and published in one go, and I'm now still subscribed waiting for my event to happen. And we can see that my publish of a message to the platform event, that happened because I've got a Lightning Web component hidden here, and it just pops an alert up at the screen. So we can see that the publish worked. And if I go ahead now and create an order, what we will see is also the change data capture here for our order that we've just created. Two different events, subscribe to, a publish and a subscribe, all in the single interface, all in one go. That's the power of the PubSub API. So a quick recap. Change data capture real-time event monitoring and high volume platform events are what are supported by the PubSub API. You've got 11 different languages you can use. For example, I use Node.js, but you can use things such as Java, C++, Python. It doesn't use Comet D. It's no longer been actively developed, so you can look to be seeing all the new fancy features come with the PubSub API instead. And the three keywords that I mentioned that you can dig into a bit more detail. gRPC is what it's built on top of. It uses a single interface and an Apache Avro format for the encoding of the binary messages. So some useful resources. 3 GitHub repositories there, one being mine at the bottom, but the 2 others being official Salesforce dev ones. These will provide you with some sample code and what helped me get my demo going. Docs, gRPC, if you want to dig into a bit more detail, core concepts and what it actually is, on top of what I've already talked about today, then it's a really good website, it's the official documentation. And then 2 blogs that again helped me get really stuck into this topic and form the basis of this deck today. What the PubSub API is all about and the features and functionality, which I've covered at a high level today, as well as the Medium article, again, official Salesforce Architect one, talking more around the external event bus and the new architecture of the PubSub API. If you want to connect with me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or via the Trailblazer community. If you can scan that QR code, you'll get some other options to WhatsApp, email, and reach out to me, any social media preference. But in general, I would absolutely recommend joining the Salesforce developer community so you can ask more questions and help each other develop new and innovative solutions. This is no longer applicable because Dreamforce 2022 is no longer happening, but what I do want to say is thank you for taking your time and watching this demo today. If you've got any other questions, reach out to me and I'll see if I can answer them or at least point you in the right direction. Thank you.